Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of MCTV Sports. Alongside Tyler Denker and Dustin Cooley, I'm your host, Jacob Young. Our top stories today will range from the first month of the MLB season to the opening round of the NBA playoffs. But first, let's start off with the NFL draft. So I'll open up the floor to you guys. First off, Dustin, what do you think of Myles Garrett, a potential #1 pick?
Well, I'm pretty sure we can go ahead and lock that in as a confirmed #1 pick because the Browns are not interested in going for quarterback, and let's be honest, if we're not going for quarterback, you just go for the best talent at #1. So Myles Garrett, he's a physical demon. He's got great footwork, a lot of strength for his size. He's not like a fake muscle kind of guy. He's got a lot of power behind that, and you're going to see him jump into the Browns defense as a great pass rusher.
And now, Tyler, on the outside, what do you think of Jamal Adams?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious he's the best safety in the class. He's a versatile player. He can really chase after those balls, get up in the air, and he can definitely make an impact on various teams in the NFL draft. I'd say that the defensive side of the ball is one of the most important needs for a lot of the teams. I know my Jets could definitely use him, and a bunch of the teams up there above quarterback could definitely use this guy, and he would definitely improve any defense for sure.
And now moving over to the offensive side of the ball, what do you think of the bully running back in Leonard Fournette out of LSU?
Leonard Fournette's maybe my favorite player in this draft because I love offense, I love excitement, and Leonard Fournette, he's got the speed of a wide receiver, but he's got the body of a linebacker, and that's something that we have not really seen in the NFL since Marshawn Lynch, who is now coming back, so we get to see a great guy with great strength at the running back position that also has speed. I think he's got the potential to be the best running back in the game.
And now, Tyler, when you think of NFL drafts, a lot of the time you think quarterbacks. So what do you think of Mitch Trubisky out of North Carolina?
Got to be honest, I have to say I like Watson a little bit better, but there's a lot of great things to say about Trubisky, obviously. He's got great arm strength, great accuracy, and he just had a killer season at UNC. And all the scouts are saying that this guy has what it takes to succeed at the NFL level. So going with that, I definitely think that his services could definitely be used by many teams in the NFL draft this season.
What would you think about the fact that he's not just a good passer, but he's also got a little bit of a mobile option to him, too?
Yep, and I would say Watson does as well, and I will stay with that argument on him.
I would agree.
And then a con to Trubisky, a lot of NFL teams have said, is that he hasn't had too much experience in college, only had to start for 1 year. So what do you think of that playing into his draft stock?
I'd say for me, the best thing about Watson is he's a winner. He won hit obviously last year, and he's been to the national championship 2 times. And that kind of winning mentality, that winning edge, the hunger to win and to succeed in that level of games is really important. And especially in the NFL, to succeed like that is imperative for any quarterback.
To kind of jump off of that, as you mentioned, he's had great success, and I think that gets attributed to the fact that he played for Clemson. That's something I like about Watson that we don't have with Trubisky because he played for North Carolina. And typically when I'm looking at college players, I'd like to see someone coming out of a good program that's got a good history of development, and Clemson is one of those teams that has been at the top consistently. So I like him better because he's got that proven pedigree behind him.
And again, going off of that, he had a lot more pressure on him throughout his years at Clemson. Unlike Trubisky, he wasn't playing in these national championships or anything like that, but rather, just like he was saying, Division I team coming out of this huge SEC school in Clemson is pretty much all you need to know that this guy has what it takes.
And now looking at the New York teams in the NFL, what do you think the Jets are going to need to looking for in this draft?
Let's be honest, they kind of need everything in this draft. They really need to start from scratch. They're kind of a team that can't admit they need to rebuild and haven't really admitted they need to rebuild for a couple of years now. The guys that we were just talking about, the 2 quarterbacks, that's something I would want them to take a shot at. I know that personally I'm not a huge fan of this quarterback class. I assume that you're not as well. A lot of people aren't. But the fact is you need a quarterback to succeed in this league, and the Jets haven't had a good one since ever, really. Joe Montana. But they've got a shot at potentially someone that could be a decent quarterback, and despite being able to get good players that could help out their defense, rebuild the secondary after Revis has left, they need to go for someone that can help the team in a larger form. So I say quarterback.
And I would definitely agree. Everything is what the Jets need, but I think that they should wait and not take a quarterback this year because I think the better quarterbacks are coming in next year's draft. And I think this year, as we all know, they've taken a defensive player in the first round 7 years in a row. And I'd actually like for that to continue. Maybe get a cornerback or a safety to improve that defense and wait until next year to go for that quarterback. And I think that that's what the Jets need. And again, there are many open spots in that roster, but I think that they could afford waiting one more year to get a quarterback, maybe have a top pick next year if all else fails.
They will have a top pick next year, I'll guarantee you that.
I think we can both agree on that one.
And now moving over to the Giants, what do you think about a potential replacement for Eli Manning?
I think they already need a replacement for Eli Manning, to be honest. I mean, I'm a pretty harsh critic of Eli Manning. I think he really rode a top defense to some Super Bowl victories. He's not a stellar quarterback, I'll be honest, he's not. He's had subpar years, he's had subpar stats most of his career, and he's got Odell Beckham right now, one of the best receivers in the game, despite being so young, and yet, what's he doing with him? Basically nothing. I mean, you know, he could use some weapons, but he's not a stellar enough quarterback to get you to a Super Bowl and win despite having a rebuild defense. So, again, like the Jets, I think they have to go quarterback, even though I do like Tyler, like next year's class better. I figured just take a shot. If it doesn't work this year, try it next year as well.
Of course, and when you look at the Giants, they have a pretty solid team as of now. They made the playoffs last year, had a pretty good record in a very competitive division. And I think that right now their biggest hole is in their offensive line. I think that getting an offensive lineman early, give Eli a little bit of protection because who knows, he could be a couple hits away from a possibly career-ending hit. So with that being said, definitely got to get a backup. But guys, the new acquisition of Brandon Marshall, you have Odell. Those guys alone are going to make Eli look much better than he actually is. So definitely got to get a QB there, and I'd say offensive line as well. But I don't think they need to worry about defense as much. They had a stellar defensive season last year.
All right, and now moving into off-season training camps for the NFL, do you see anyone getting traded moving forward?
I got to be honest, I would love trades, but I don't think we're going to see it. We've had that bit of excitement going around, the big names being floated. Typically, the Patriots have been involved in some manner or form, whether it's trading somebody out, bringing somebody in, Garoppolo, Butler, even bringing in Richard Sherman, and yet all just flattens out because nobody is bigger than the Belichick system. I mean, Butler, he had worked out a contract with the Saints, but they wouldn't give up a first-round pick, and I don't blame them for wanting to keep that secondary so strong. Garoppolo, I would move Garoppolo, even though Brady, he's not got that much left in him. He's got to get something of value for Garoppolo because he's a quality starting quarterback. He can start for a lot of teams in this league to me, and he's going to be gone because he deserves to get paid. He's going to get paid by somebody, and they're just going to lose him for nothing. So he's got to go, in my opinion, but he won't.
I agree, and that's totally a typical Belichick move to hold on to a player that so many teams need and just kind of stash him away because based on what we've seen with Brady, he has probably at least a couple of years left. I mean, last year's Super Bowl performance was really incredible. So, as you said, we're going to hear about it. It's the media. There's going to be trade rumors. But in the end, I don't think there are going to be any big pieces moving this year. And I think that for the most part, teams are going to stay with their solid core going into next season.
Well, all right, that's going to do it for the upcoming NFL draft. When we come back, we're going to talk the NBA playoffs. Welcome back. For this segment, we're going to talk about the NBA playoffs, so let's get it started with a few series. First, we're going to touch on the Celtics and Bulls series. So how do you think the recent Rajon Rondo injury is going to affect that series?
Tyler?
Well, a lot of people have been saying that this Rondo injury changed the entire series. Obviously, the Celtics stole 3 from the Bulls in a row after the Rondo injury. Now, I kind of disagree with this, and that's because before these playoffs, Rondo was barely used in this series, and honestly, or he was barely used at all on the Bulls. At one point, he was benched, and he was possibly being cut. Now, I think it would have been way more catastrophic for them to have lost, some would say, Jimmy Butler or Dwayne Wade. So while I do think that the Rajon Rondo injury was big and was a series changer, I don't think it's as big as people are saying it to be. And I think that the Celtics simply just turning it around and gaining momentum is more of the reason that they're winning opposed to that that injury.
You know, I'm going to have to disagree with you on that. I think that Rajon Rondo was actually a pretty key piece to this series. You know, he wasn't the biggest piece. Obviously, Jimmy Butler is the most important player of that team, and Dwayne Wade is his sidekick, even though he's got the experience, so he shouldn't be his sidekick, but he's not as talented. But when Rajon Rondo was in there, he was playing pretty good defense. He was shooting surprisingly decently, and he was an absolute monster at distributing the ball and rebounding. That's something you don't typically expect from a point guard, and yet he was doing it. And Dwayne Wade, you know, he was not shooting as well as you would kind of want him to do. He's the kind of guy you would want to put up 20 points a game, maybe more than that, but he's been scoring in the teens, and that's kind of why they maybe, while they have had a good chance to come over the Celtics and upset them, why they maybe are not the favorite to do it right now.
Now, the Celtics are leading 3-2 right now. Do you think the Bulls have any shot coming back in this series?
I personally think that especially without Rondo, there's not a chance, but I think even with Rondo, it would be tough because coming back from 3-2, especially when you would have to play one of those games on the road, is extremely tough, especially when you're the 8 seed playing the 1 seed. So I think it definitely is going to be a tall task for the Chicago Bulls.
You know, I think that it's already settled that Chicago is not going to come back, that this is going to be Boston's series now. They've finally gotten their momentum back, and I think that's in large part due to Isaiah Thomas. You know, everyone obviously knowing the tragedy of his sister passing away right before this series. And personally, you know, I know from experience that through his grieving, how he, while at first he maybe have struggled in the series, the fact that he can use this to actually fuel his game while, you know, it is actually good for him to be able to play basketball because it gives him something that can tell him, you know, life will continue to go on, that this is something he was doing before he lost his sister and he can continue to do it after. So it's something that can really help clear his head. And if he's a really good athlete, then he can turn this tragedy into a kind of motivation and use that emotion to fuel his power. And I think he's done that, and that's why we've seen the series switch back to the Celtics.
And I totally agree with you, Dustin. Losing somebody like this is obviously so tragic and so terrible, but I think for Isaiah Thomas, the basketball court is his safe place. This is where he goes to clear his mind and just do what he does best, and that's play basketball. And I think that's shown this series. I mean, he's still put up incredible stats and obviously led the Celtics back to lead his series. So obviously it's a terrible tragedy, and I'm sure there's tons of things going through his mind, but you can't argue the numbers, and he's really brought his team back into it and probably leading them to the second round.
All right, right now in the Bucks-Raptors series, Toronto's leading 3-2, but Giannis, the Greek freak for the Bucks, seems to be a one-man wrecking crew. What do you think about him?
I mean, Giannis Antetokounmpo, a man who lives up to a pretty spectacular name. He's been a one-man wrecking crew. I have to give it to him. You know, there's not really that much to love about this Bucks roster. I mean, they got Chris Middleton, who's a solid mid-level kind of player. Greg Monroe, same thing. Those guys can put up some buckets, but it's been pretty much all him. He's got to do everything. It's kind of like Russell Westbrook in OKC. And the biggest thing to me of why the Bucks are really in this series, other than giving Giannis his proper credit, is the fact that Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan and Serge Ibaka have been not consistent enough for the Raptors. They are the key scorers of this team. That team relies heavily on its starting lineup. And, you know, Kyle Lowry, he's got to be a leading scorer for that team. You got to see DeRozan doing it. They've got to be shooting great percentages. And Ibaka, he doesn't have to be hitting 20s, you know, any kind of high scoring, but he's got to get double digits and do it on a decent percentage. That's why, if you look at the games that they have lost versus what they've won, you know, those three guys, they've got to all be shooting good percentages to be able to win, and you can see that reflected in their wins and losses of the series.
And I definitely agree with you. When you talk about a one-man wrecking ball, think about what Giannis did for the Bucks this season. He led the team statistically in points, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks. Like, I find that absolutely incredible, and he literally is the only reason I think the Bucks are even remotely in this series. And even though I don't think that they're going to get it done this year, I think that they're going to be very exciting to watch in the future, and who knows what this Greek Freak can do.
So we're talking a lot about the Greek freak, but ultimately, do you think Toronto's going to hold on for this series?
I have to say yes.
Definitely.
All right. Well, before we move on from that, we have a quick clip to show about how the Bucks introduced the Raptors one game in Milwaukee. All right.
6'8", number 5, Damari Carroll. At the other forward from the Republic of Congo, 6'10", number 9, Serge Ibaka. A 7-foot center from Lithuania, number 17, Jonas Valanciunas. At guard from USC, 6'7", number 10, DeMar DeRozan. And at the other guard from Villanova, 6'1", number 7, Kyle Lowry. The head coach for Toronto is Dwayne Casey.
And another series that's 3-2 right now is the Spurs over the Grizzlies. So Kawhi Leonard, an MVP candidate for the last couple of years, how do you think he's been carrying the Spurs?
Well, I mean, he's an MVP candidate, but he truly shouldn't be. Let's just get that out of the way first. It should be between Harden and Westbrook. I give it to Westbrook because he's got that triple-double. Only one other guy in history has done that. But sticking to the Spurs and the Grizzlies, Kawhi has really had to throw this team on his back. LaMarcus Aldridge is not what he has been really expected to be, what they need him to be. And the bigger piece of this to me is the fact that they do not have Tim Duncan on this team anymore, and he's been replaced by Pau Gasol coming off the bench. Now, while they're both old guys and they both can score pretty well, the bigger thing to me is that Tim Duncan was such a great facilitator for that offense. People don't realize that him and Boris Diaw for the Spurs were great facilitators down low in the paint. They could catch the ball, and they were such a threat that they would draw extra defenders, and they could just easily kick it out to somebody who could either attack the basket on their own or pull up for a shot, like Kawhi could just pull up for a three, and we don't see that with Pau Gasol.
And no, he may not be the most valuable player, but man, he's just so valuable to the way the Spurs play basketball. I mean, I like to say that he is the most Greg Popovich player ever, besides obviously Timmy D. But if you talk about Kawhi in terms of efficiency this series, I mean, what can't you say about him? I think at one point, it was through Game 2, I believe, he had 78 points on just 24 shots. It was something like that, but that kind of efficiency is unheard of from anybody. And you put that kind of offensive outburst together with the huge defensive output that he has, he's arguably the best two-way player in the NBA, and that alone makes him so valuable to the Spurs.
And on the other side of the ball for the Grizzlies, they have another Gasol brother in Marc Gasol. So how do you think the Grizzlies have been shaping up against the Spurs?
I mean, I think the Grizzlies are probably facing the one team in the West, other than a low seed, that they could actually beat just because they're both old teams, let's be honest. I mean, Gasol's going to face up against his brother. He is better than Pau at this point just because Pau's got more miles on him, and he's a bigger key to that Grizzlies team than Pau is to the Spurs. But, him and Conley, they're still going to be very solid. They're going to be very good, put up scoring, play good defense. But outside of that, I mean, what do they have? They've got good defense, but they can't score the ball. That's always been their problem. It's never been something they've really been able to solve. It's kind of gotten worse ever since they traded Rudy Gay away a couple of years ago, and they still have no fix of it.
And I couldn't have said it better. It's unfortunate. It always feels like the Grizzlies are always playing the Spurs in the first round.
Yeah, so do you guys think the Spurs are going to come out on top in this one?
No doubt.
Yep.
All right, and now we're going to move on to the Clippers Jazz. The Clippers up 3-2 right now, and Blake Griffin recently going down with an injury to his right toe. So how do you think that's going to affect the rest of this series?
So it's kind of interesting because you would think that a guy like Blake Griffin being lost on a team would be totally catastrophic and you could just count them out. But here's an interesting stat. The Clippers are 41-23 without Blake since 2015. So obviously they're losing a large presence down low and they're losing a huge scoring presence, but it's interesting because CP3 and DeAndre Jordan actually play better when he's not there. So I would not count them out. Is it a loss? Yes, but I don't think the loss is as great as many people may think it will be.
I have to agree that it's not as big a loss that people would say it is because he is a star player, but him and DeAndre Jordan, they don't collaborate as good as they really would be expected to. They're not like the Andrew Bynum and Pau Gasol duo we saw in LA, that really good, big Twin Towers effect that you would want. That's something that pretty much nobody in the NBA would be able to match, but we don't see that. When we've had Blake Griffin go down, DeAndre Jordan is still good because Chris Paul is just going Lob City no matter what with DeAndre Jordan. And yes, Griffin's absence will hurt, and I do actually think the Jazz will win this series because Blake Griffin's loss is enough to push it back towards the Jazz, who have come into their own this season, especially Gordon Hayward, who's shooting great. He's doing everything this year. So I think it's going to be enough to push it to 7 games, and it's going to be enough for the Jazz to take it.
I agree, Jazz in 7.
So I think another thing to talk about with the Utah Jazz is that Joe Johnson's really been capitalizing on that Blake Griffin injury, and he's really been able to step up too.
ISO Joe, as they call him. I mean, he's just been incredible. And you could see him last year on the Heat. He was nothing like this at all, but he's really come into his own this postseason, and he's been super clutch, just as his nickname aspires.
He's kind of reminding us of why he once got that now awful contract of, I can't even remember, it's 100-something million from the Atlanta Hawks. And although he was not worth it at the end, getting paid $24.5 million a year, he's got more value than he's playing for now, so at least he's doing something right.
And before we go from this segment, what are your guys' thoughts on the championship this year?
Warriors, no doubt. I just don't see anybody beating them. I think their most competitive series will be against the Spurs, but I just don't see it. I just think they're too dominant.
I got to go Warriors as well. I'm still not sure about who's going to come out of the East. I don't have as much faith in Cleveland, but if you had to ask me right now, Cleveland versus Warriors, Warriors win.
All right, that'll do it for that segment. When we come back, we'll be talking about the MLB, including the Yankees and Mets, and if Manny Machado's slide was controversial. Welcome back. For our last segment of the show, we're going to talk about the MLB. Now, Dustin, I know you're a big Yankees guy, and they've been playing well as of late, so I'm going to hand it over to you.
I mean, I'm impressed, but I'm cautious so far. You know, the biggest surprise to me so far has been the rotation. It has not been awful. I mean, the only guy going in that was supposedly going to be any good was Masahiro Tanaka, and although I hate the fact that he's still pitching with a torn elbow ligament, he did not have Tommy John. I hate that risk. He's still doing good, and Sabathia's somehow doing solid. Pineda, he's had some decent starts. Montgomery has been okay his first couple starts, and Severino, someone who I really have had high hopes for, he's been good too. So I like that. I like how their lineup's been performing, even though they, lost Sanchez to start off. They've been solid so far. I got to admit, I like it.
And I think the biggest surprise to me is the fact that they're actually having a good start to the year. I feel like for the past 5 to 6 years, the Yankees have gotten off to these extremely poor starts, and that's really killed them for the rest of the season. They kind of hit that middle of the season string where they start coming out on top, but they've really struggled in the first quarter of the year in the past couple of years, and I think the biggest surprise is how quickly they've turned it on this season.
Now, with the Mets, the injury bug is floating around right now, including Yoenis Cespedes, so how's that affecting the team?
I mean, Yoenis Cespedes, he is the Mets lineup, and what do you expect when you pay him like he's going to be your entire lineup, giving him, I think it was average annual value of $27.5 million a year, something like that. So when you pay a guy that much, he's got to be the guy for you, and you are banking on him to carry that whole lineup, and when he's injured, which he now is, what do you expect the team to do? They're going to go right back down, so that's why you're seeing him at the bottom.
And their record says it all. They're 4-10 at home and really struggling. They're, I believe, last in their division at the moment. So I definitely think that injury is definitely a huge impact for them.
So who are some teams that have impressed you both this year?
I mean, like I said, the New York Yankees, they've been a shock coming out of the gate. That does make me a little bit cautious about how are they going to do at the end of the year, because typically I like teams that they don't come out roaring because you don't want to overuse yourself. I kind of seen the Red Sox do that for a number of years. They come out pretty good, and then they kind of fall down towards the end of the season. But in addition to them, I've got to highlight the Chicago White Sox, a team that I've said, oh, thank God Chris Sale's finally on a good team this year because they got rid of him. I mean, Chicago White Sox, I thought for sure that they're going to be a tanking team this year. I mean, I'm sure Barack Obama was expecting that because they're not going to compete like their crosstown rival, the Chicago Cubs, but here they are, so they're doing good.
I'm going to agree with Dustin on one of those. New York Yankees, obviously their explosion in the beginning. They're second in the league in run differential and first in runs allowed, so their defense is working as well. And if the pitchers can catch up to the bats, they could really be a tough out for the rest of the season. And the second team for me is the Arizona Diamondbacks. Last season, they were the 7th worst team in the MLB, but now they're off to a quick 14-9 start and are tied for their division lead. And they also have the most runs in the MLB and a plus 26 run differential, which is good for 3rd in the league. So going from basically worst to first is pretty good for a team.
So now at the other end of the spectrum, who hasn't been so impressive this year?
I mean, you can't go anywhere except for the Toronto Blue Jays. They basically just let Batista go, let anybody that they thought could be any good go, and they didn't do anything to replace anyone. Excuse me, not Batista, Edwin Encarnacion. They kept Batista around. Presumably he's not going to be there long-term either, but what do? Their rotation is still meh. Their guys in the lineup, they're weaker now. They don't have that power out of Encarnacion, and they're I think they still have single-digit wins. They're doing so bad. They're one of the worst in baseball. They've got okay pitching at best. That rotation's going to be bad. The bullpen I could see some improvement if they made a couple of moves there, maybe bring up some of their young talent they have in AAA. But that's basically the best hope I could see out of their pitching staff, and I see no hope out of their lineup.
And for me, we've talked about it before, but the Mets have definitely disappointed. They came in with such high hopes, possible World Series contention, and they're 4-10 at home. They're last in their division. They're the fourth worst record in the league, and they're currently on a 6-game losing slide. And I definitely think it's because of Cespedes. So hopefully they'll get him back soon, and they could get back on track to their beginning of the season expectations. Another team that's really disappointed so far is the Giants, another playoff team from last season. They're the 5th worst run differential, so they cannot get it going. And they have an 8-14 record, and of course they just lost Madison Bumgarner, who's arguably their best player and pitcher, over that accident, and that's definitely going to cost them going forward.
Well, I mean, this is the Giants' off year. They've got that superstition of they're good every other year, so I'm pretty much going to expect them to suck this year. But next year, Giants fans, look out because they're going to be good to go.
I was going to say, wait till next year.
So recently in a Orioles-Red Sox game, there was a Manny Machado slide that was pretty controversial. So do you think this is a concern for the division rivals?
I mean, personally, I don't think it was intentional. Just looking at it, I'm probably the outlier of this. You know, Manny Machado, he did kind of have his cleat up, but I don't think he was going full Ty Cobb because you can see from the footage that he did try to grab Pedroia when he was going down. So I do think it's not intentional. I think if there's any more retaliation going forward,
here's the slide. He makes contact, but then he comes up and over the back. Looks like he did get spiked in the back of the leg
from the Red Sox. You don't want to have that kind of look representing a franchise.
And you kind of saw in the video, because I'm actually going to agree with you, I'm not so sure it was intentional. His foot kind of slid over the base and into Pedroia. But whether it was intentional or not, it really doesn't matter because Pedroia anticipated as intentional. So that's going to rile him up, and that's what's kind of caused this entire thing. And, I mean, going forward, I think that the Red Sox and the Orioles will have better things to worry about than this person-to-person rivalry, given that they're both usually at the top of the AL East.
I mean, to me, that rivalry actually could help because they're at the top. Usually when teams are going to be competing, that's when it's going to push it. You know, look at the Yankee-Red Sox rivalry. Was there ever a time where it was stronger than 03, 04, where they were at the top of that division fighting it for each other's throats? I mean,
literally, Don Zimmer, Pedro Martinez, literally fighting at each other's throats.
So maybe that's a good sign for the Orioles that they'll actually be good.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this edition of MCTV Sports. Along with Dustin Cooley and Tyler Denker, I'm your host, Jacob Young. Have a great night.